Hello, and welcome to this edition of Health, Happiness, and Harmony Partner training videos. The entire library of these videos, what we call a narrative of wholeness, provides the scaffolding necessary to assist individuals in their personal journey and those helping others in their personal journey. The 3 HPs, or Health, Happiness, and Harmony Partners, work with a specialized vocabulary, concepts, metaphors, and stories. This is what we mean by scaffolding. Today's video is part of the Psychology Everyone Needs to Know series. We will draw heavily from the psychology book, Big Ideas Simply Explained by DK Publishing. Today, we will continue to work through the section on psychotherapy, looking at the tyranny of the shoulds, the big idea developed by Karen Horney. The roots of this big idea go back to Johann Friedrich Eber, who put together the big idea that concepts become forces when they resist one another. So he put cognitive dissonance, the unconscious, and ideas together in a very unique way. Another root of this is Pierre Janet, who described splitting where a personality branches into distinct separate parts. He developed neurological science that had a big impact on the fields of dissociation and trauma. Both of these influenced Sigmund Freud, who developed the idea that the big idea that the unconscious is the true psychical reality. I would switch it from the unconscious to the not conscious. Freud influenced Karen Horney, who was born 1885, died 1952. She in turn influenced Melanie Klein, who wrote about the struggle between the life and death instincts that persist throughout lifetime. Heinz Kohut, who in the 70s had the big idea that when children's needs are not met, a fragmented self emerges, consisting of the narcissistic self and the grandiose self. She also influenced Albert Ellis of the 1970s and his rational emotive behavior therapy, intended to free people from their internalized must. So Karen Horney's big idea was that there are social environments. These could be family, schools, workplaces, the wider community. And over time, these develop cultural norms. And these cultural norms are upheld by certain beliefs, which can be conscious or unconscious. But if these beliefs are unhealthy or toxic in the social environments, these social environments are likely to create an unhealthy belief system within individuals. This unhealthy belief system can feed back into cultural norms, which feed back into social environments. This is the scaffolding necessary to understand Yuval Noah Harari's book, Sapiens, when he discusses the vicious cycle, where a chance historical situation is translated into a rigid social system. This is in the chapter of explaining why there is no justice in history. The second thing these unhealthy belief systems within the individual can do is hinder people from reaching their highest potential. Karen Horney taught her patients to become aware of and notice the difference between self-determined beliefs based on experience and beliefs internalized from toxic environments. If a belief is internalized from a toxic environment, it feels like your thoughts, but they have been inserted to you from the outside, in a sense. Internalized messages show up in the form of shoulds. For instance, there was a quote in the book, "Forget about the disgraceful creature you actually are. This is how you should be." Other internalized toxic beliefs could be, "I should be recognized and powerful. I should be thin, rich, successful, etc." To differentiate these beliefs from the self-determined beliefs, it's very difficult. That children really are not able to do this. People just absorb their original social environments. So this is work for people in their teens, 20s, 30s, and 40s. Because your original environments are not all good or all bad, or it would be rare for one to be all good or all toxic. That it has elements of both, and that's why it's hard to separate it out. And so she said, we have a quote, awareness works better than trying harder, if she's trying to make you aware of the difference in these kinds of beliefs. There's another quote that I picked up from Parabola magazine, awareness is the teacher. So she has the concepts of the real self, which has authentic desires. And how do you know which desires are authentic? You really use the Socratic method to find out which desires are inauthentic. You could also use Jungian psychotherapy or existential techniques to separate the authentic from the inauthentic. What she calls the ideal self is not necessarily a good self. It strives to fulfill all the demands of the shoulds. A book that would be relevant here would be Addiction to Perfection by Marion Woodman. Another would be a quote from Carl Jung, the purpose of therapy is wholeness, not perfection. These internalized toxic beliefs fill the mind with ideas that are unrealistic and inappropriate for the journey of the real self. They generate negative feedback based on failures of the real self to meet all the expectations of the ideal self, such as expecting to be perfect or to make all 100s. The ideal self could also lead to the development of a third self, the despised self. So I like the phrase earlier, to benefit the journey of the real self once you're freed from the tyranny of the shoulds. Karen Horney called this that the shoulds are the basics of our bargain with fate. The idea goes like this: if we obey all the shoulds, if we behave are pleasing and good, and we meet all the expectations of society, at the expense of our authentic self, our true self, our real self, or our soul, we will believe we can magically control external realities, but really these toxic beliefs lead to deep unhappiness and neurosis within the individual. This is not an easily solved problem, and it can be dealt with at one time. This is something that people continue to differentiate through their entire life. On the inside, the inside of an individual, toxic beliefs can create unhappiness and neurosis. On the outside, these kind of toxic beliefs support cultural norms that lead to deep unhappiness and neurosis, oppression within the individual, but oppression and unnecessary suffering on the larger social scale. Karen Horney was a German-born psychoanalyst coming up in the 1930s. Her own social environment of the early 20th century Germany, the book mentioned, leaned heavily toward conformity, which would really be an understatement. But she would have had a front row seat for seeing how the tyrannies of the shoulds can lead to toxic beliefs, which lead to toxic cultural norms. Thank you very much.